Welcome to our webinar, educational event hosted via Labour Left Alliance, and then also in accordance with Labour Left Alliance Northern Ireland. My name's Lewis Nesbitt, and I'll be helping host the event today. I've got two great speakers with me, Donal and Anne, who are going to give their perspective on today's webinar, which is about socialism in regards to the Irish question in Ireland. I'm not sure how many people viewing this know much about the actual historical context, but I think to give it a very, very brief summary, we'll be discussing things in the context of a post-Good Friday Agreement political context, which is that the baseline of having partition, and in reference to that, forming a united Ireland, is it formed in the Good Friday Agreement that there would be a democratic mandate both in the Republic of Ireland and in the north of Ireland or Northern Ireland in the form of a referendum that would only take place by the UK government finding that there was enough of a majority within Northern Ireland to trigger that referendum. Now, obviously, that's just the political or legal position of the Good Friday Agreement. There's obviously a lot of historical context behind that about the struggles of Irish nationalism in forming the Republic, how partition came to be, the various rebellions, Wolf Tone Rebellion, Easter Rising, the Anglo-Irish War. If you're not 100% sure on your history, we can always fill in any questions anyone has, but there's a lot of historical context behind this, but I think our speakers are more than capable of explaining this to anyone who has any questions. I'm not going to waste any more time myself. I'm just going to hand it over to Donal first. If Donal wants to introduce the topic from his perspective and kind of give a bit of a background on his position in this. Go ahead, Donal.
Thank you, Lewis. And I don't know how long I have to do a lead off on this, but have you any indication, Lewis?
We'll go for a good 15 minutes or so, and then we'll have some questions, a few questions, so that people can kind of give their perspective on what you say. So if anyone wants to give questions, there's a Q&A option at the bottom of your screen, and I'll see it, and then I'll start sorting through the questions, and then I'll bring people on to ask the questions live, or if people don't want to come on live, because you need to have a video to come on live. If you don't want to come on live, I'll ask the questions to our two panelists here. So if you want to work away there, Donal, 15 minutes, is that okay?
No problem at all. Yeah. Well, the national question is obviously a very significant question for socialists. It's specific to Ireland, obviously, but there's many countries where this poses a problem for the advancement of socialist outcomes. And obviously it goes way back. What are the origins of nationalism? Really is the demand of the bourgeois class to establish and capture for itself a national marketplace. And that's really the essence of the coming together of the states. You saw that in Europe in the 1700s, even the 1600s in England, in a sense. The establishment of broader marketplaces, and nationalism was the demand of the rising bourgeoisie to effectively create more than just regionalized or localized markets for its products, and that the natural delineation of that was to establish the nation state, and this was obviously a progressive element at that time, because it cut across the localism and the regionalization that was inherent under the feudal mode of production. So at that point, really, certainly in the classic revolutionary era, when it was tied to the movement of republicanism. It was quite an organic movement to secure, progressive outcomes, to advance interconnections, and also to unleash the full potentiality of the capitalist mode of production itself. Obviously, after a certain point, things tend to turn into their opposites, and what was initially a very positive demand in many places become reactionary insofar as the states themselves concretized. Then the demand became almost protectivism within the economy, but also it led to racism, xenophobia. These things often come out of it, but most importantly, really on a global scale, it gave rise to naturally to a form of imperialism, and that that the capitalists no longer were content with achieving dominance in a home market, but they sought to extend that market wherever possible, in particular through the development of imperial possessions abroad, where they could capture sources of revenue of raw materials. Most importantly, also slavery was related to it. So the capitalist mode, there's a positive dimension to nationalism and its rise, but certainly after a point it became a negative factor, and Ireland in a sense has both aspects of that. The Irish nationalist rise of nationalism was certainly in its early era, when it was anti-imperialist. There's no doubt that it was organically progressive insofar as it sought to unite and to develop the freedoms of capitalism in a sense, in a quite a feudalist and agrarian society. But thereafter, there was also negative features insofar as it also gave rise to chronic sectarianism. But really the key issue is how imperialism fought against these positive trends by seeking to divide and conquer. And this was a tactic that British imperialism and most other imperialisms used. British imperialism was most known for it globally, was it sought about dividing subject peoples and then using those divisions to actually not only acquire the empire, but to sustain and maintain the empire. And the consequences of that really is long-term divisions that you see in many parts of the world, where you have national questions which reside long after overt British imperialism or any other form of imperialism, overt imperialisms have left the stage. So I think it's very important to see it in its context. The national question has obviously been a very contentious issue with socialists, even revolutionary socialists. There was the famous debates between Lenin and Luxemburg of the 1910-11 period. Rosa Luxemburg would have had a position very much opposing the nationalism of, say, the Polish, who sought liberation from the Russian Empire, sorry, did I get that right? Yeah, she opposed her own nationalism, whereas Lenin would have seen it as more of a positive thing insofar as it was countering what he saw the dominant pole of the contradiction, which was the Russian social imperialism, or Russian just imperialism at that stage. So it is obviously something that can divide. In the concrete circumstances of Ireland, partition has to be said to have been a chronic disaster for working class people. What was partition other than an attempt by the British imperialist state in conjunction with the rising nationalist bourgeoisie either side of the border, in a sense, to cut across the potentiality of what was really a socialist revolt. You had so many upsurges, 1919, obviously 1913 before it. You had the rise of general unionism, the rise of the labor movement as a radical movement, which effectively was a direct threat to imperialism in Ireland. And that's precisely why Connolly forecast the carnival of reaction. In the aftermath of partition, you had two quite backward states. In the north, you had a state largely composed, run by the Unionist or the Orange State or whatever it would be. In the south, you had a largely clerical dominated Catholic state in which the national the national capitalist class really run it in their own interests in conjunction with the church and any form of progress. And that's why you had all these laws, these laws which were quite anti-women. You had laws that were minorities. Protestants were treated quite abysmally. And even obviously working class Catholics and socialists were almost targeted, and there would have been intelligence gathering on them in the 40s and 50s so that they would have to emigrate. So you had both these states. The northern state was absolutely ridden with sectarianism. The Orange Order had a dominant role in society. And in the middle of that, then you had obviously the attempt by republicanism in various ways to destabilize the north. But in my reading of it, the most destabilizing factor in the north post-partition, as it was before partition, was the potential of the labor movement. And there's a quote here, I always think it's a useful quote, sort of a book by Peter Haddon. And it's a quote in regard to Craig, because what happened was immediately after the partition, the Labour Party still won considerable seats. Northern Ireland Labour Party, also the Communist Party, won seats. And they were particularly concerned by this because it was quite destabilizing for the early unionist statelets. And they obviously got rid of PR, which was one of the features, which was why they managed to win so many seats. And Craig, who was a leader of the Orange state in the early years, said in 1929 that without PR, it would be possible to have in Parliament men who are for the union on one hand and who are against it and want to go to a Dublin Parliament on the other. So the main thing that the unionist state in its early days wanted to do was to prevent the rise of anything that crossed along between the two conflicting nationalisms in a sense, because that was inherently destabilizing, considering the vast numbers of working class Protestants who were trade unionized, who were radicalized, who were open, and who saw through the ruling elite unionist party and what they were about. And I think that that's a key thing to note, really, even from the inception of the state, and the reason it was set up in the first place was to cut across socialist opposition, both to bourgeois nationalism on one hand, but also towards imperialism on the other. And the role of the unionists as almost the unionist elite as the foot soldiers of imperialism. So I think the conflict, obviously, that come after that was really about a failure of the civil rights movement to actually cohere a cross-community message, because it always must be remembered, while Catholics were certainly discriminated against in the north, Protestant working class people were denied votes for, just as long almost. So it was quite a reactionary state in all regards, and the potentiality was there for a common across the board demands for socialist outcomes to actually unite people against the unionist state in particular. And when that failed to cohere sufficiently and was basically shot off the streets in a sense, and also there was a failure of the union leadership to stand up and actually play a positive role, unfortunately. We had the splitting of the Labour Party in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, and it left the whole situation quite quickly go down into the conflict which we experienced for so long. And then on the back of, really, it has to be said, the Republican movement has suffered a defeat. Its strategy certainly could never have delivered the victory it sought, but they've re-established really a power-sharing executive installment, which does not reflect anything really for working class people. It reflects only a concretization of sectarian division. And it seems the unionists, the DUP in particular, are now dominant, certainly reflect the interests of the big bourgeoisie of both sides, really, in a sense. And Sinn Féin are certainly a long way down that road in many regards. I could certainly give you example after example, whether it's PFI or corporation tax policies, or 101 examples where Sinn Féin are way down the road of becoming quite almost indistinguishable from the DUP in many regards on economic matters. And so it is primarily about reinforcing the divisions of unionism and nationalism to the point that they cut across the potential of working class people to unite and to take action. And the other thing really is that the understated truth is that all the way through since the establishment and before the establishment of Northern Ireland, there has been continuous struggles in the workplaces, which remain cross-community, which remain quite unionized, and these have come up against the Orange State, but also in recent times they've come up against Stormont. So there's obviously a lot to discuss around Brexit and the sharpening, I guess, of some impetus towards like a border poll. And I would say a lot about that. I think it's quite reactionary in a sense. But I don't know how long I can go on for. I've got another 3 minutes. Well, I will say a few things really. Sinn Féin seems to be hoisting or going all in on the potential to win a border poll. And that is really rooted in a sectarian conception, which is that, you know, a head count really, it's changing demographics will yield a united Ireland. I think it's absolutely foolhardy if it is genuine as an aspiration. A smooth transition to United Ireland. It's telling me my internet connection's unstable. I don't know what it means, but I think it is certainly naive, and it's almost cavalier to the point of criminal, because I think if there was genuinely a border poll conducted, you would see a sharpening, a really rapid sharpening of sectarian divisions and a heightening of tensions. And I think that there's every potential within that when we have society, when our communities are so even geographically and socially divided, for there to be quite a destructive outcome of that. And it is certainly for a socialist, the key to our strength as socialists, as we all know, is unity. It's about transcending divisions carefully fostered. It's about bringing people together on positive, progressive campaigns behind the idea of a socialist solution to our problems. And I think that the idea of winning a plebiscite as the means to actually affect the ending or the transformation or the sublation of the national question is almost ludicrous. And I don't think it's the way it will ever happen. I don't think that there will be a peaceful transition, frankly, to a bourgeois United Ireland. I don't think it's possible. And I think what we need to do instead is to actually counterpoise the idea of unity, of class unity, and of internationalist perspectives, and to oppose the idea of coercion. Socialism is an advanced democratic system. It really represents the democratization of our economy, not just of our society, of what the bourgeoisie allow us to democratize. It represents a democratization of our economy. If you really believe in a system of very extreme democracy, which is what socialism is meant to be, then the idea of coercing a large minority into a state that they fear, that they have no allegiance to, it must be alien to you. So to me, what you need to do is, as a socialist, is to attempt to unify people and to therefore build a cohesion that is capable of transcending the past and the divisions of the past. And I do believe, in final point really, is that we seek without coercion to establish a socialist Ireland in a socialist federation of England, Scotland and Wales and Europe and so on. That's the solution. It has to be looking beyond further division, and it has to be beyond looking for coercion as a solution, because it is no solution.
Thank you very much, Donal. That was a brilliant, I wouldn't say intro, that was a great start on this webinar, kind of discussing the concept of partition and also the Irish question in general. It definitely highlights the contrasts and the movements of the political establishment in the North and the South, especially in the North, where you know, there was a lot of solidarity between Protestants and Catholic workers. you know, things like the Belfast docker strike is one I always like to go back to and read about before things really. I know sectarianism was obviously prevalent before, but there was that real sharpening of sectarianism after like things like the docker strike, and the establishment here kind of began to see the power that the trade union movement had. So really great introduction there. Just to say again to everyone who's listening, there's a Q&A option at the bottom of the screen if you're an attendee. If you click on that there, you can leave a question. If you want me to read it out, I'll read it out. Otherwise, if you have a video, you can come on here and talk to the panelists and engage in the topic that way. You know, we're happy to talk about it and explain anything. So I forgot to introduce Donal, sorry, but Donal is a councillor for Mana District Council, for Mananoma District Council. We've got Anne as well. How's it going, Anne?
Okay, thank you.
Anne, I don't know how to introduce yourself because I know you through our last webinar, so I don't know if you want to introduce yourself really.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so we haven't had many questions yet, so give the questions in and then we'll get the questions soon going. But yeah, Anne, if you want to kind of take it away there.
Okay, all right, thanks a lot. Thanks, Lewis. I appreciate being invited to take part in this discussion. So my name is Anne McShane. I live in Cork, Southern Ireland. I obviously grew up here in the 60s, 70s and 80s, and went to London in 1986, got involved in Communist Party politics in London. In fact, became really properly involved in Irish politics, of, you know, in the sense of the struggle around the Irish question when I lived in London. And I'm back here in Ireland more than 10 years now, and I consider myself a Marxist, and I'm also a lawyer. I do a lot of work representing migrants and refugees, and have particular interest in those kind of issues. Anyway, so essentially, like, my approach to today is simply to try and engage with the discussion, and that is, I think we're now beginning, or that the LLA has begun, on the issue of United Ireland in 2020. What does that mean? What should the approach of socialists be? So I haven't got like a preset, well, I do have certain ideas about this, but I haven't got my position to put, if you see. I want to try and engage and ask some questions about where we're at. So, I mean, from my own personal experience, I would say that very, very certainly James Connolly was right when he spoke about the carnival of reaction that would result from a division of Ireland. Growing up in Southern Ireland in the 70s and 80s was a very oppressive experience as a woman. And even just generally, even in terms of your ability to think independently and to oppose the stranglehold of the Catholic Church over the working class in Ireland, and its hold, I suppose, its connection with the state, and the theocratic state is how I would describe it. And I remember actually getting to know some people who were Republicans. Here I live in Cove, near Cork City, and there would have been quite a number of people who were Republicans living around this area. And I remember like asking them or raising questions about, you know, the situation with the north of Ireland. What did they think? You know, what were their views? And I remember always them, you know, saying to me that it was an extremely difficult question to speak about openly because of the level of repression that we were subjected to by the Irish state. I mean, here in the south of Ireland, people maybe they do remember, but Gerry Adams, we couldn't hear his voice. We were not allowed to hear his voice. We had a situation where they dubbed his voice with an actor. I mean, you know, you've heard Gerry Adams now today, and I'm sure, you know, people will agree with me. It's not like that his voice is that devastating. Why this happened? It was, you know, very strange kind of an approach, but it went hand in hand with an extremely repressive machinery bent on ensuring that there would be nobody brave enough to speak up and say what's happening in the north of Ireland. We should do something about what's happening in the north of Ireland. What about the imperialist division of Ireland, to basically quell nationalist aspirations and to make people feel as though the only solution was within the 26 counties. So that was something that I found to be a very kind of salutary experience. And it was only when I went to London that I could really feel that I could speak openly about the question. And I was surprised when I first came across people on the left in London that many of them did support the struggle for a united Ireland and supported the self-determination of the Irish people as a whole. And that was something that I found very interesting, and I found actually a very positive experience. And I stood in an election in 1992, and I stood as Anne Murphy in the general election for the Communist Party of Great Britain. And I said at the time that I supported the IRA against the British Army, by which I meant that I supported the struggle for self-determination of the people of Northern Ireland against the repressive machine of the British state. It didn't go down very well with my family here in Cork, as you can imagine. But nevertheless, when I look back on that and that experience, I think I agree with that person I was in 1992, in the sense of I think that this national question in Ireland has been resolved in a negative way by the bourgeoisie and continues to be the two states are repressive states. The bourgeoisie, the British imperialism and the Irish government, through the Good Friday Agreement, I do not believe that they have come up with a positive document. I do not believe that this is a document that will provide the opportunity for a democratic resolution of the Irish question. So I agree with Donal on that point. And I disagree with many of the left organisations who at the time of the Good Friday Agreement heralded it as a new dawn, that this was the opportunity to resolve this question. And I disagree with those people also who say that the border poll is the way forward. So for me, I think as a Marxist and as a progressive, I think that when we speak about the working class and the working class and dealing with this in a working class way, it can't just be about economic struggles and trade union struggles. And I think perhaps Donal would say I'm perhaps wrongly interpreting him, but I do get a bit of that in that, you know, and perhaps also what Lewis said, how people saw how the trade union movement could be their united movement. Because I think you can look at so much other history and see the lockouts, you know, the discrimination against Catholics in the shipyards, all of those questions, they can't be, they're not going to be resolved over a struggle on a trade union issue. These are very deep-seated issues that which people feel very strongly about, both Catholics and Protestants. So basically, I think there certainly is still a national question. You can see from the polls that have been conducted in the last year and a half, that the situation in the South is that, I think in last November there was a poll and there was something like 70% of people wanted a united Ireland and wanted a referendum. That's not the case in the north of Ireland, but there are changes obviously in the north of Ireland because of demographics, and those have also been pointed out to. And as Donal says, that's what Sinn Féin want. They want constitutional resolution of the issue through that basis. And I agree with him. I think that that is a very problematic approach. And I think that it would be perceived, I think, by many people in the Protestant community as a way to push them into united Ireland against their will. So I agree with you. I don't agree with, like, for instance, people in the Socialist Worker Network or People Before Profit have been pushing the idea of a border poll, and I think it's very problematic, because the last thing you want to do is reverse the poles of oppression, so that rather than Catholics being oppressed by Protestantism in the north of Ireland, Protestants become oppressed by Catholicism or Republicanism or by the United Ireland. So I think that that's very problematic. So okay, so basically, the other thing I wanted to say is that I think that the question of Ireland is a question for the British and Irish working class in many ways, because I think that without the British working class taking up the question of Ireland and making it their own, then I think we're never going to get anywhere. Because the British working class have too long accepted the role of its state in Northern Ireland, the repressive role of its state in Northern Ireland. And maybe a lot of that is to do with ignorance. I mean, I remember when I used to speak to people when I lived in Britain, a lot of the time people didn't really understand what it was all about. They thought everybody was kind of crazy over there. What are they fighting about? It's all mad stuff. And I think that was as a result of a very effective indoctrination policy, Ulsterization, all the various policies that people may be aware of, which basically created a situation where it all seemed to be irrational. That the Irish, they just can't stop fighting with each other. They're mad. And the British are there to maintain peace and stability in Northern Ireland. That's what we've always been told, peace and stability. That's the reason, that's the only reason, otherwise they wouldn't need to be there. And obviously, as Donal has quite rightly said, the presence of the British state in Northern Ireland has not done anything to stabilise the situation, except obviously today we don't have the fighting we had before, but the divisions, as I understand it, and you can tell me a lot more easily about them because I don't live in the north of Ireland, the divisions I believe are still as sharp and and that the cross-community problems remain the same. Certainly hasn't resolved it, and now with Brexit obviously we're entering into a new phase, and like obviously Brexit for the south of Ireland is a disaster, and I think it is going to have big problems for the north of Ireland as well. But I don't think that that's necessarily going to mean that people are going to come up with the solution of we need a united Ireland in a democratic fashion. I think it could make things worse, in fact. So I'm not a supporter of Sinn Féin. I think that Sinn Féin is another manifestation of constitutional nationalism. It's like another Fianna Fáil. It's today's Fianna Fáil. The fact that Mary Lou MacDonald made it clear that they were willing to go into government, in fact wanted to go into government with Fianna Fáil, shows really just how leftist they are. They're very lightweight. And I think that it has been a problem here in the south that left-wing groups, the People for Profit Alliance mostly, have advocated a left government with Sinn Féin. It would be a disaster for the working class. It would be an identification with a bourgeois nationalist party, which has been already tested in the north of Ireland, and we've seen, as Donal has said, just how united they are with the DUP when it comes to it on questions that affect the north of Ireland. It would be creating a whole and they did create a whole new set of illusions in this party. So I'm not a supporter of Sinn Féin. I probably was back in the day. I probably was Workers' Party. I would have voted for Workers' Party. But what I think that we need to talk about is that how does the working class of Ireland and all of Ireland and the British working class deal with this question? We can say the bourgeoisie, they have no solution. They've made things worse, or they have frozen. They have made a bad situation. They've frozen that sectarianism, you can say. How does the working class deal with it? Now, we did have a debate in an organisation that I'm close to in Britain a few years ago about what kind of united Ireland, and we discussed the issue of a federal united Ireland. I differ from Donal. I don't think we should be talking about it in terms of socialism. I think it's an immediate demand that we should fight for now. And I think that the idea at the time was a united federal Ireland with a particular part of Northern Ireland where Protestants form the majority, them being able to live in this part of Northern Ireland and have their own self-government and, all political rights and remain affiliated to Britain if they wanted. I find the kind of division, the idea of a division of setting out, well, these are the two, I think it is actually only 2 counties at the moment that Protestants form the majority in. I find that the idea of saying this particular part of Northern Ireland is a part for Protestants, I find that a problem because there are so many other parts that are interpenetrated, and I think it creates an idea that everybody should go there. It's almost kind of like an ethnic cleansing idea. But I do think that the issue of a possible federal United Ireland, but certainly something that something that considers a policy for the left that proposes a united Ireland with self-determination for those people who identify as British Irish or Protestant, up to and including separation. Because I think that cuts across this whole border pole, being pulled into an Ireland that they don't want to. It cuts across that question and it raises things up from being about trade union rights and community rights. It puts forward the bigger question of national rights. I think that with nationalism, unfortunately, we seem to be dogged by nationalism. But I think that the only way to resolve it from the point of view of socialists is to raise up the rights of those people who want to be separate and say, yes, you have those rights to separation. You should have your political rights once you don't oppress others. So I think I've probably come to the end of my time. And thank you again for the opportunity to speak.
No problem, Anne. Thanks very much. It's great to have 2 representatives, from 2 different geographical areas as well, because not only is there a political dynamic, but like you said, from your experience in Cork and then London and moving around, that does give you more perspective and changes your perspective constantly here. There's a lot of people who move to London and change their perspective when they come back. So we've got a good few questions here. We've got about 14 people have asked questions. I'm going to start with someone who doesn't want to come on camera, just Kelly White, and then we'll bring some people on camera. So this is something as well that I actually wanted to ask as well, which is Kelly White says, the last Life and Time survey here showed that most people identified as neither unionist or nationalist. The question I pose is this: do we want to be dragged into a neoliberal reunited Ireland or work towards a socialist programme for the entire Ireland on the path to unity? This is obviously a big deal right now. There is a growing majority of people who aren't identifying as unionists or nationalists. So, Donal, do you want to take this first, and then Anne, and then we'll move on to people asking live?
Yeah, thanks. There was a whole pile of issues that come out of Anne's contribution, which I probably need to develop at some point. But in terms of the question that you've read out there in regard to do we want to get involved in it, I think how best do you advance the fight against imperialism? How best do you advance the fight against bourgeois nationalism? It's about uniting the class. And for me, that is a major difference between myself and Anne, if she thinks, as I seem to derive from her, that we can have like a stages conception, whereby we have like a political national solution, which is somehow dissevered from the process of building a working class movement that will actually deliver that. It's actually, to me, it's it's certainly non-Leninist. It's non-socialist, though, really, in a sense. It's about dividing, so you end up with this idea, we'll achieve this nationalist objective first. And this is pretty much Kelly's question. Is the stages conception. The idea is, and this has been a major division in the left for for over 100 years now. Well, actually, to some extent, yeah, it has been a division on the left for over 100 years. That the idea is that you can have, that there's a 2 stages. that there's an idea you can have like a national revolution that is somehow disconnected as a socialist from the need for the working class to actually deliver the transformation. And if you look at the early history of even Lenin, he wrote very clearly that that the working class had a role to deliver the democratic revolution, as he called it. But it was in his head, it was unclear as to exactly how quickly that would roll over to a socialist revolution. But the reality was, when it actually happened in Russia, that there was an immediate, that the two things came at almost exactly the same time. And that was the nature of the April thesis, is really the theory of the permanent revolution, in a sense. It is the theory of the permanent revolution, which is Trotsky's main difference with Lenin. But the issue is really in an Irish setting, if you even cast away all the theory, how do you affect people actually mobilizing behind the demand for nationalist outcomes to the point that you actually transcend the inbuilt sectarian headcount, that you transcend the divisions in society? That, well, the first thing you have to say is that where are workers, or where is ordinary people, working class people, where are you together? And it's primarily in the workplaces. So if you want to actually defeat those who keep us divided, whether it is in terms of where we live, or where we, sports and cultural and all this sort of thing, every other aspect of our lives are often divided. But where we're together and where we're strong together is in the workplaces. And that's the essence of socialism, in a sense, that the workplaces where you have, especially industrial workplaces, where you have large numbers of working class people coming together, young people as well, is the same thing. A lot of the time you'll find this is the innate capacity that gives us the ability to actually prosecute the achievement of even democratic outcomes. So we need to focus like a laser beam, in a sense, on building workers' unity. And I agree with Kelly in a sense. We need to focus on the progressive ideas, certainly around demands that could be cross-border, but mostly even in Northern Ireland. We need to build unity within the North. We need to build unity North and South, and we have to build unity with the working class across these islands. And I don't think, another thing I kind of disagree with Anne on, is the idea somehow we can have like a socialist Ireland standing alone, socialism in one country. Well, it was kind of mad if you know your history, in the 20s to be talking about, or even the 10s. The idea of, that one country, especially a small country, given this particular economic circumstances of Ireland, that we can somehow have a standalone socialism is ludicrous, even before you start considering the minority population, or the British population in Ireland, if you want to call it that, or indeed the links between Britain and Ireland economically. There is no solution that is simply a 32-county solution. That is not to deny the national aspirations, but it is to say that in the modern world, that these nationalist ideas about how you achieve socialism or any form of progress are completely wrong, and they have been wrong for 100 years. And they've been, where we need to go is actually internationalist. It's about uniting workers where they're at, recognizing that Northern Ireland's had 100 years of existence. It has a state. It has its own mental. People are used to it. It's not going to, there's an attachment to it. It's social. So to me, I agree with Kelly in the sense we don't want to be talking about a bourgeois. Of course, we don't want to be talking about bourgeois Ireland. Who's going to vote for a bourgeois Ireland? Who's going to vote for more of the same 32-county free state? Who's going to fight for that? Nobody. Everyone's, what we have to aspire to is an internationalist vision that speaks across the divide, that speaks to the realities of the Black Lives Matter just as much as it speaks to the realities of nationalist oppression or whatever. And I think that's where we need to go to as a movement, as opposed to these conceptions which are really out of date almost of, Workers' Republic or 32-county United, whatever form of United Ireland. It's not going to wash, actually, I don't think.
Okay, thanks, Donal. Anne, would you like to talk on Kelly's question,
Yes.
which is about, what's a United Ireland going to look like in the, are we going to go for a neoliberal reunited Ireland first, or should we focus on a socialist united Ireland? Because obviously there's this growing despondence between unionists and nationalists in the north here.
Okay, so look, thank you. So maybe if I try and put it another way, I believe in socialism. I believe we need to be struggling for socialism, and I don't believe that we should have socialism in one country. For certain, I apologise if that came across as my position. I in fact said that it was an issue, that the question of Ireland was an issue for British workers as well as Irish workers. And I absolutely agree and argue all the time that we need to actually be looking at any revolution in a European context, at the very least, as part of an international revolution. But I do not see that there is, Kelly, like I do not see that there is a contradiction between being an internationalist and arguing for national rights. Because I think that if national divisions harm the unity of the working class, then the only way to overcome those divisions is by saying, within the struggle for socialism, you people who identify as British Irish or Protestant, or, you know, we can look at other parts of the world, we can look at Spain or the Basque Country, we can look at other, you know, other countries where there are national questions and say, I think, obviously everything is concrete, but the general approach, I think, a better approach for us as socialists, as Marxists, is to include in our struggle for socialism demands for national self-determination where those demands are relevant. And in Ireland, I think those demands remain relevant. The Northern Ireland state, I don't know, it could perhaps carry on for another 300-400 years, but like, that's not really the issue, is it? The issue is there a national question in Ireland? And I'd say there is a national question in Ireland. And the fact that there are changes within the Northern Ireland population show that Sinn Féin's demands for border poll have more resonance now than they would have had before. And as I said earlier, I am against the idea of it being of approaching it on the basis of a border poll for the reasons I've given, which I do not think that Protestant people, those people who do not want to be part of United Ireland, should be forced to do so. So I can't see any other way to overcome that national antagonism except through democracy. And I think, I disagree with Donal. I think I am taking, I wouldn't necessarily call myself a Leninist, but I would think that my approach is actually very similar to the type of approach that Lenin took with the national question in the former Tsarist regime, i.e. those countries, those peoples who wanted national self-determination, that was included as a slogan in their program, and they were granted national self-determination after the revolution. So I suppose I'm not arguing for an Irish a 20 or 32 county bourgeois state. No, I'm arguing for the working class to take on this question as part of our program for socialism. Okay, I'm going to let other people come in because obviously it's good to
No, that's no worries. Yeah. That's great. It's yeah, again, two sides of the argument, which is why there's a lot of nuance in this discussion. Okay, so right now we have 7 people looking to ask some questions. Also, we were meant to have Sam Gibson on this webinar, but sadly he's not well, so he couldn't attend. So we've had Harry Hutchison, who's here as well, but we'll get a couple people that come in and ask some questions, and we'll maybe try and limit the questions to one panelist each, just to keep it moving. And then we'll have Harry come in and talk about, Harry will come in afterwards and talk about, you know, his perspective. So I think we'll go for Ken first. Is that okay, Ken? Hold on.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Ken.
Okay, thanks to both panelists for their contributions. The question I wanted to ask was whether Donal thought it would be in any sense useful to allow voters in Northern Ireland to vote for the British Labour Party, if you want to call it that. I mean, in a sense, the British Labour Party seems to be drifting a long way from socialism at the moment. So the extent to which it would help to form a properly socialist approach might be questionable, but it is an existing vehicle, and as somebody in the Labour Left Alliance, I'd very much want it to see it become a proper socialist party. But that's one part of the question. The other sort of supplementary, if I may, is there have been reports of a movement in Ireland to unite the anti-capitalist parties or organisations with the pro-environmental organisations, and I don't know if that has any legs or any mileage in this context, but I'd be interested in Donal's views on those subjects. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Donal, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, thanks, Kenneth. Those are interesting questions. In terms of the last one, which was really around whether there was a movement to unite anti-capitalist and environmentalist, there's always that sort of stuff ongoing, but I'm not sure I even know what you're referring to. So it's clearly not been that advanced in a sense. I'm probably the only. Well, there are a number of independent councillors, and there are also people before profit in the north, and there's some green councillors who would be left-leaning, I guess. But I would be the only one elected on a cross-community Labour socialist basis, drawing support from across both sides of the community. And that's a really difficult thing to do sometimes, and it's only come on the back of a very extended period of trying to build and there's traditions in the area and so on. So it's particularly, it's challenging, but it shows it's possible to do this. And this is the old style. This is the theory of all the socialists have always had, that, you know, you can build a cross community on the basis of a consistent socialist, revolutionary socialist perspectives. You can actually build and win mass support from both sides of the community. And I think that's where we need to go with everything. And that kind of gets onto your main question, which is, I think clearly there are democratic rights. Clearly the Labour Party should have the right, people who are members of the Labour Party, to stand in Northern Ireland. I myself joined the Labour Party in order to try and make connections, but also there was a real, thousands of people swole the numbers in the Labour Party books in Northern Ireland. I think they had 3,000 members or supporters. And that was because of Jeremy Corbyn, what he offered in terms of, it was a hope that there was finally an end to the neoliberalist, mainstream. And that cut across the sectarian divides in Northern Ireland. There was a lot of Protestants who, notwithstanding Jeremy Corbyn's association with republicanism, which would be perceived very much genuinely as toxic, they were willing to ignore that in order to try and participate in this movement for change. And I think, and the young people flocked to that, and people like Harry Hutchinson would be able to tell you about it, and anyone, that there was, real motivation behind that. But they wasn't allowed to stand in the elections. The most destabilizing thing, as I said earlier on, since the 1920s, for the one-party statelet that exists for 80 years, was cross-community, genuine socialist Labour-type politics. And that was the very thing that has always been undermined. So they aren't allowed to run. I ran, I was expelled. My election agent was expelled. Eventually, we won a council seat. And I think that with Keir Starmer in charge, I don't think there's going to be that much of an impetus towards trying to revive the Labour project. But do I believe that there is an absolute burning necessity for cross-community, mass Labour, socialist politics, whatever it is, involving people like Lewis and so many others, and can this change the society? This is the only way, in my honest belief, of changing the society really fundamentally in the foreseeable future in any positive way at all. That the road to a border pole of coercion is potentially the road to a civil war, repartition, and so on. The opposite way is where we have to go, as uniting the working class people making ourselves relevant to their lives, whether it's in the workplaces, in communities, young people, so on. And can we do that? Whatever vehicle really exists to do that in a mass way is the vehicle that I am interested in advancing. But I don't believe that the Labour Party will be allowed to do that for various reasons. Unfortunately, if they was to become that, I don't know if they can. I don't think they probably can, frankly. But I think they have an innate right to do that, to stand. But I don't even know, even if they did stand, whether it would be the right thing. Because as you opened in first words, you said the British Labour Party. And that is the key thing. This always comes down to the national question. And I totally agree with Anne. The national question is not gone anywhere. And every movement of the socialist movement, any genuine movement of socialism will have to face up to the national question, will have to face up to the necessity of an appeal that's capable of reaching all sections of the working class and uniting them behind the red banner.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Donal. That was great. Hold on, sorry. Yeah, we've got a few more people to come on next, but I'm eager to get Harry Hutchinson in to kind of give the tail end of the, this package deal here. Harry's hoping to talk about kind of what the movement and movers and shakers of Stormont in regards to socialism are like, and a wee bit of that history. So I think I'll have Andy Ward on next to ask the next question, and then we'll go to Harry Hutchinson, and then we'll come back to questions. So everyone just hang tight here. So I'm just going to spotlight Andy here. Andy, go ahead.
Okay, comrades. Okay, I mean, first of all, I totally agree with Donald's position. The Socialist Islands was the Socialist Federation of England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. I mean, and it has to be working class unity. Now, the question I raised, I did put it on the question and answers thing, and and it's something to really, working class unity is obviously finding things we've all got in common with. Now, the big issues we've had is a pandemic and also global warming. Surely a universal free healthcare campaign right across the, including stop privatisation, in Northern, in NI and the rest of the UK, and also private, complete, nationalisation of healthcare in the south. Surely that's one, by publicly owned, democratically publicly owned, ownership of healthcare in the south. Surely, surely that's the best way to unite the working class on that campaign, because universal free healthcare is right, and this global pandemic, it's part of an international campaign around the world. I mean, this is about us breaking down state boundaries. Socialism, we get a socialist world. The state boundaries have given away, so our national identity wouldn't even matter eventually. At the end of the day, we're in, and another thing I'm looking at is also global warming. We've got a melting planet we're in. We're living in a melting planet. It's absolutely catastrophic going on at the moment in time. And the next pandemic, you can't rule out, could come from global warming. So surely campaigning for a Green New Deal that's anti-capitalist right across these islands is really, really important, including north and south, as well as across the water as well. It's absolutely key. I think, these are two things. And I do agree, I think relying on trade union leadership, I think it has to be an umbrella group, umbrella campaigns that brings people together, that drags the aristocracy of the labour movement screaming, being honest, because relying on trade union leaders, there's too much interest, and it drags their feet. You're riddled in bureaucracy. So it has to be a campaign that unites people, that cuts across people's positions and all that shenanigans, which is a problem with the labour movement at the moment in time. It has to be rank and file. The 1990s, I was involved in the anti-poll tax movement. We dragged, it was labour, and also the campaign against criminal justice act, the campaign against domestic violence. The Labour leadership, the trade union leadership, didn't want to touch those campaigns, but we achieved something. We got rid of the poll tax. We made the criminal justice act unworkable. We criminalised domestic violence, and also with the criminal justice act, we forced a new Labour government to ban fox hunting, and also put domestic violence investigation units in police stations. They were umbrella campaigns, and I think that's what we've got to do to bring socialism, especially in this time, especially these worrying times, moment in time. We can't wait for bureaucracy. We've got to do it from the grassroots.
I'm going to put this question to Anne, if that's okay, Anne.
Sorry, I didn't expect, I thought that you were going to move on to other speakers. So it was about, what I really got from that was about finding things that we could agree on, the working class can agree on. So, okay, I don't have that. It's not that I'm looking for things to disagree on, but I think you've got to deal with the issues that divide us. And I think that there is no point in just saying everybody thinks we need a free health service. Agree. Everybody believes that people, well, perhaps some people actually don't agree that we need a free health service. Unfortunately, here in the South, because of the role of the private insurance. Anyway. Or also the issue of getting agreement as workers. For me, I think that the working class is not just the worker in the factory. The working class is a class that sells our labour power, yes, but we have we exist in all, you know, in different forms. We've got workers in factories, unemployed, you know, women workers who've never been able to work. But we as a class, what we as a class have in common is the ability to transcend this society in a unified way if we can win through our leadership all sections of society. So that's why I'm saying that democratic questions, to me, are absolutely fundamental. And I think that including questions such as the rights of national self-determination or rights for minorities in any programme of the working class is essential. I just don't see that we're going to get beyond those divisions without those issues being raised. And I think that, as we've seen in the north of Ireland, it's very difficult, as I understand it, to build unity between nationalist and unionist communities because of the national question, and that trade union disputes have historically been deeply influenced by the national divisions. I mean, even like here in the south of Ireland, we talk about trade unions. The trade union leadership in the south of Ireland has been dominated by Fianna Fáil, which is the old Republican Constitutional Nationalist Party. So, you know, you're not going to get away from the national question. You're not going to get away from those difficult issues if you go just on the if you concentrate just on community issues or just on trade union issues. So that's my response. Thanks.
Okay. I'm going to bring on Harry now. Harry's been waiting there. Harry, if you want to kind of discuss, you know, how you view things up here, and give your perspective on what's been said as well to kind of bookend this discussion, and then we'll go straight into more questions. Work away.
Okay, Lewis. Thank you. I mean, the first thing is I'm very glad we're having this discussion, because the Labour movement have continually shied away from this. And the reason for that is that they've never had a class approach to the national question in Ireland. And so thankfully there's people on the left at least raising this question. I think what you've got to do is you've got to look at the state of any state that's wanting independence, or for that matter to break away from Britain. I mean, if you look at the situation in Scotland, very narrowly, quite recently, they voted to succeed with, to keep with Britain. However, since then, there's a massive mood in Scotland that's almost certainly now, I think it's going to be a foregone conclusion, that they're going to break away from Britain and go independent. I mean, my own feeling on it, I don't think it's really going to advance the Scottish working class at all, because it's substituting one bourgeois state to an independent Scottish state. Ireland has its own unique character. Now, Donal went into the reasons and the origin of that, which goes back to the 1600s. Imperialism moved in, brought huge people over, drove the native population of the land, give the land to effectively Protestant people. And from there, the aim is companies, companies incidentally that still exist to this very day. The Drapers Company, the Salters Company, Calvin Company, all still exist. And the aim was to use, of course, the rented land of the people, the planters, and they were effectively going to gain huge companies. That has created rebellions throughout the history of Ireland, and none more so from the very planters themselves. I mean, the United Irishmen stood up against, because they were being ripped off by rents and so on, and that was one of the great rebellions that took place there. It was defeated, and it was, but however, the likes of that and the Land League had indeed brought some success, because much of the land has been transferred to the native planters, and in many ways there's been gains made by some of the rebellions that have taken place. When you move forward to the division of Ireland, and again Donal has mentioned this, it was crucial that imperialism divided the country, and that goes to the very nature of the period itself. It was after 1917 in Russia, and there was a huge socialist movement that would have united the people of Ireland, that in itself could have progressed and become a risk not only to British imperialism, but to the very British state itself. So all along the line, there's always been division. I don't think there's anything more than has divided the people of Ireland than that border created in 1921. But British imperialism has learned a lot from its history. I mean, when the planters came over, what happened is the planters actually absorbed themselves into the native population. They developed their culture, they developed a lot of their practices. And in many ways, that worked against British imperialism. So when you move towards today, it's not just a case of dividing the people, north and south. It's a case of dividing also the people in the north. And since effectively 1921, but more in the later period, certainly around the 60s, is that division has led to what effectively is today, in my own opinion, more polarization than at any time in the history of Ireland. The Good Friday Agreement, Anne mentioned it there. I mean, since the Good Friday Agreement, there has been things like more peace walls and more division that has taken place. And that division has been carried out predominantly by the political parties that exist today. They never miss an opportunity to divide people. One of the most cases, I think one of the biggest cases of where division has taken place is in the communities. And you look about the armed wings of both Sinn Féin and the DUP that have played a prominent role in dividing the communities, driving Protestants out of one area, Catholics out of another area. And today we're faced with a division, particularly in the communities, also in education, division. The only place that I think we've had some progress in it is in the workplace. And that is down to things like the fair employment legislation that has brought people together predominantly in workplaces. But apart from that, we are a very, very divided community, deliberately carried out, particularly by the main political parties, but of course supported fully by the Bride Britain itself to keep the people in the north divided. Now that leads me to the question of where we move from here, because Anne, for example, raised there about possible successions, which would be under a capitalist basis. Successions in the north, that maybe some areas could still remain with Britain and the British jurisdiction. But the way the problem is here is that it's in a map. When you look at the character of the north and look at the division, some of the cities are predominantly divided. Some of the villages are more often than not all divided. I would say 90% of them are predominantly divided. And it's scattered. It's like dots on a map that is divided. And to have any solution, it's a bit like when you look in Israel and their movement and the annexation of the West Bank, the succession and just cutting off one area and have it succeeding in other parts will not. In fact, there's no remedy at all in looking at that in the north of Ireland. The way forward, and again, I think Donal has mentioned this, and I think Anne has mentioned this as well, is through the unity of the working class. And the biggest movement we have at the moment to unite people is both the trade union movement. It lacks a political party. We have one in the north, which is predominantly the Labour Party. In the south, there isn't a political party that really exists that represents the working class. The Irish Labour Party abandoned the working class many, many years ago. It plays no serious role at all in the labour movement in Britain and anywhere else. But that unity is to bring people together in that unity and to raise the question of the national question within that is the only way forward. I don't think that we can put solutions forward. To put solutions like federations, even Donal mentioned there about a socialist Ireland. I mean, any solution, I think it's got to be on a socialist basis. But I remember talking to John Throne. He was very prominent here. He's unfortunately passed away a year ago. And John mentioned, I think, came to the conclusion that I came to, is to put any solutions forward at this era is not something that we would pose. Be it federations, confederations, even for that matter, a socialist Ireland. But I do believe that it's got to be based on the unity of the working class, based on a socialist solution. And that's the way forward. We've got to unite people. I know there's some sections in the north that there's a small section, about 16%, that shows that they neither view themselves as unionists or nationalists. So that in itself is a progression. But within the trade union movements, they are very solid in this, because there's unity exists in the working class and they can be united. The problem is they don't have an initiative to take this forward and move it forward out of the realms of the bourgeois political parties, out of the realms of the state, but one that will unite the people on the basis of socialist policies and raise the national question, to bring people and resolve the national question in itself. Okay, Lewis?
Thanks very much, Harry. Yeah, we've got a few more questions. People have came in. Just again, if anyone has any questions, just go to the Q&A section and ask away. We're going to try and get through as many as possible. So next, Matthew Jones, is that okay if you come on next? I'll just unmute you now and go ahead, Matthew. Go ahead. Oh, Matthew, we can't really hear you right now. Check your mic settings. We'll come back to Matthew. We'll keep you there, Matthew, and we'll come back to you in a second. Just we've got Alan Gibson. Alan, do you want to talk now?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Alan.
Thanks to the presenters and thanks for the discussion. It's been very interesting. As you'll tell from my accent, I'm not from these parts, though I have been living in Ireland in the south, in Cork, for just coming on 13 years, and before that I was living in London for 13 years, so I do have some familiarity with the political territory. I think what Donal had said before, that it was difficult to see how there could be a democratic solution without some degree of coercion in terms of a capitalist reunification. I think that's true. I think that then poses the issue of how will the national question be resolved, and I think that will have to be in the context of a workers' republic of some kind. Now, before Donal jumps on me, I don't think that calling for a workers' republic is counterposed to an internationalist perspective, but I would take on board what Harry had said, that we don't want to be too prescriptive about exactly what form wider socialist organisation across Europe and the world would take, though I myself sometimes use Irish Workers' Republic and a Socialist Federation of Europe. And I think that question poses some other issues around working class unity, which Donal talked about. But I think that, as Anne and Andrew had mentioned, there could be aspects to that which go beyond the shop floor. While undoubtedly our strength as a class in opposing capitalist rule will find a sharp end, and much of its activity around work in the workplace. It's also true that there may well be other issues which mobilise the working class, for instance, about, as we saw, the significant mobilisations in the South around opposition to household and water charges, and then following that more recently around women's reproductive rights. And I would agree with Andrew that given the extreme crisis we face in terms of ecological collapse, that will also be, or could also be, a major factor in mobilising cross-national unity. I do have a question for Donal though, because I'm not entirely sure, but you seem to be projecting a socialism which was tied up with labourism. You were kind of using the two terms interchangeably there in one of your times you spoke in response. And I think that's a bit problematic, because the kind of unity we need is for a deeper anti-capitalist unity of the working class, looking towards building new forms of social governance, what people mostly from the socialist tradition would call workers' council type organisations as the new form of government. And relying too much on a Labourite parliamentary road, although standing candidates may be useful as a subsidiary tactic, should be seen as secondary to building working class strength outside the parliamentary arena. And finally, just one other question. It's linked to the question of internationalism, and in particularly the context of Britain, which is important for whatever happens in Ireland, both north and south. And that's the old slogan of British troops out of Northern Ireland. Do the speakers think that that holds, still holds its political usefulness that it had in the past, and particularly for work amongst the British working class? Because unity with the British working class in opposing the British imperialist presence in Ireland is going to be very important. Finish. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alan. Donal, are you happy enough to talk on this?
All right,
go ahead.
Thanks for Alan's questions. Very interesting. Just to go back, maybe there's one thing Anne said earlier on in regard to. I just have to correct it as far as I'm concerned. I don't believe, maybe there's one case, because I had heard of one, but virtually, with the exception of the one I'm not sure of, it's never been the case that a strike has been broken by sectarianism. And that's a vital lesson to remember. It's about when workers do go into struggle, the sectarian divisions kind of go to the side. And it is one thing for sure. The first thing you will meet if you ever do any campaign work in Northern Ireland, if you ever try to actually take on whether it's capitalism or the state or anything like that in any regard, the very first thing you will find is that people will come in principally from both sides of the community in terms of the political representation, the sectarian parties, one side or the other, and they will try to split everything you do, because it is a threat to their very existence, the idea that you can successfully do this. And my experience is actually that it can be a bit challenging, right? But it's not impossible by any means to bring people together. And in fact, it's almost organic at times if you've got the right issue, which is cross-cutting in terms of impact, people will unite. And then what happens often is in those circumstances, all the parties will tend to unite behind them, but actually subvert underneath the covers. So it kind of takes me to a bit, I want to kind of challenge the overall negative picture to some extent, I think, that Harry painted. While it's certainly the case that society remains divided, there's no doubt of that, and the class remains divided, unfortunately, we're in a much better position than we was when the conflict is on. Yes, there's peace walls. Yes, there is sectarianism. In many ways, it's maybe more subtle, but at the same time, there's huge outpourings of cross-community mobilization, working class mobilization. There's been very significant strike actions, occupations, and even within those, you look at Holland and Wolf occupation, where a traditionally very extremely linked to unionist Protestant loyalist sort of workforce actually broke through all the boundaries, like the idea of a shop steward, the lead shop steward leading an occupation for 10 weeks in Belfast shipyard, speaking Irish about, you know, say Saval or Glos. It just cut through, and it shows what can happen. So while there is definitely a negative, there's also a very positive. And you look at the BLM mobilizations, Black Lives Matter, young people, very much including minority communities, but also Protestants and Catholics united. So there is this potential. To take maybe some of the points around what Alan has said there, because I think there's a huge depth of analysis, I think, from where he's coming from. I obviously, when I say labourers, I'm a socialist, I'm a Marxist, let's be honest. I have no problem with saying that, but I think we need to recognise that there's a tradition of labourism in Northern Ireland, the Labour Party of Northern Ireland. And when you speak to that tradition, you're attempting to break through, you know, the barriers that exist to socialists. And there is a problem with socialism. Sometimes socialism can be even tainted by association with nationalism. That's the truth. And republicanism, because a lot of the groups that are very overt about the socialism can be saying that they're Republicans. So sometimes the word Labour can cut across that. At the same time, I think the word socialist is certainly capable of doing it as well. And I mean, certainly the sort of socialism that you use. I do think, as a councillor, there's absolutely vital to use whatever democratic outlets and opportunities we have to advance class politics and clear class politics, because that's the way we'll cut across the divisions, and also to politicize the very points I think Anne was saying. It can't just be about trade union struggles. We have to tackle every single and anti-democratic overhang. There is a main issue, and I haven't really got speaking on enough, which is really about the self-determination, because there is a right to self-determination for the Irish people. But it could be equally argued by many Protestants, has been argued, that there's a right to self-determination in the North. Now, I think that case is more challengeable, frankly. I think that the Northern Ireland state has not solidified to the point that there is an objective self-determination existing there. But I think as socialists, we have to be very flexible. And I do agree with Harry there. We can't afford to say this way it has to be, and this, because you'll not win people on that basis. You'll not win people with an overt, you have the blueprint and everyone has to sign up to it. That's not going to work. But what you have to do is maybe offer some ideas. And I do think the formulations around federal linkages, East-West, Britain and Ireland, England, Scotland, Wales, it's where things are probably heading anyway if you look at Scotland. So it has a capacity, and I think it's absolutely vital that we talk about no coercion of the Protestant community. I think the word workers' republic, because it has republic in it, is poisoned by the consequences of the sectarian war that did occur. There was a sectarian war. There was a war against British imperialism, true, but there was also a sectarian war, let's be honest, and people are really hurt by that. I don't go around saying I'm a Republican. I don't believe in monarchy. I don't believe in feudal estates, but I'm a socialist, and I know I use that word, or Labour, whatever word you want to give it to, as a way of communicating the full meaning of that word. I think the idea of British troops out, which is certainly something my tradition was probably only the ones that was talking about in 69, that's very important, that we keep an anti-British military thing. But again, what do you mean when you say British out? A lot of people think that's Protestants, and for the language is very problematic if you're really trying to reach and build and cut across the unionists who only seize upon these mistakes by some socialists to say, well, look, they're just, and it's easy to do because that's where you're going if you're on that language. So what we have to emphasize is the unity over the division at every point. And I think we need to be very flexible around identity. We have to recognize as socialists, as Labour people, as this group is, that there is Protestant people, there is British people, a large number, hundreds of thousands of them, who view themselves and are genuinely British in Ireland, and they have a right to that identity and a right to respect of that identity and a right to political representation and expression and constitutional expression of that. And that makes it a much more complicated situation than simply, you know, can you advance, is you know, really what's the worth of a stagist conception in a sense. We have to just advance socialism to unite people. Uniting workers is our principal objective, and that's the way we're going to change anything, I think, in this society.
Thanks, Donal. We've got a bit of time left here, so we've got lots of people to get through. So Matthew Jones, I hope your mic's all okay now. Give us a shout. Oh, Matthew, I still can't hear you just yet.
Still can't hear you.
Oh, I can hear you, Matthew. Yep. Go ahead. You've gone quiet again. No, Matthew, I'm sorry, we still can't hear you. We'll circle back around again because I know you have a question to ask. Let's see. Lucia, Colin, are you there? Lucia?
Hello? Hello, yes.
Hello.
I'm here.
How's it going?
Hold on, I'll put my camera on.
That's great. Thank you.
Oh,
Go on ahead.
See everybody. I'm from NIPSA, Broad Left, and the Militant Left, and my question after attending an NSSN UK-wide and international-wide Zoom meeting this morning, a conference regarding uniting trade unions and trade unions fighting together to forward our programme for socialism. I see that as the way forward to continuing the fight, especially now after COVID, when everything is going to be virtual in the future for as long as for the rest of this year and for into next year. I see it a great opportunity for us to be able to engage with each other and build the trade union movement so that we are that fighting force against capitalism and against governments and against everything that is going on in our fight. I've been a trade union activist for nearly 40 years now, and the struggles that I have seen have been not only the letdown of the unions, the letdown of governments, the letdown of management, the letdowns that we've all been put through, just to make us stronger. And to me, this is a great opportunity for us to move forward in struggle virtually by bringing everybody together. I mean, this last wee while, I have to say, the solidarity with comrades all over the UK and wider has been something that COVID has actually shown that we are all fighting for the same goal, and that is socialism. That is to defeat the capitalists and to continue to put our programme forward. So I suppose my question is really, I had put it to Anne there in relation to something she had said about trade unions. No, maybe she didn't say it, maybe I picked it up wrong, that trade unions weren't the only avenue for bringing the working class together. I do think we need to be using the word working class all the time, because it's the division between the working class and the ruling class that separates us from them, because we are going to be, if we don't continue this fight and unite all lefts together, you know, regardless of our differences, all lefts together have to fight for a future for the next 100 years for our children and our grandchildren, and we have to leave them a decent legacy. If we don't do that, then who's going to? And to me, this is going to be our way forward now. for doing that. On the national question, I'm neither Catholic nor a Protestant. I'm an atheist. I believe that everybody is equal and everybody needs to be fought for, and anyone that can't fight for themselves needs us to fight for them. And that way, for me, fighting the management and fighting the trade unions, and I think it's a shocking disgrace that we have to fight the trade unions to show leadership, which they haven't been doing, and our way is the only way, I think, to bring socialism to UK and internationally. Should it be through a federation in Europe or whatever? It just has to. We just have to stick together. That's my belief. Thanks for listening to me.
No problem. Thanks, Lucia. That was great. Anne, do you want to talk on that if you don't mind?
Actually, Lewis, I just wondered, I see there's a lot of people wanting to speak, so I'm okay to wait until the end if you want to let other people in.
No problem. That's great. Okay, we've got a few more people ready to ask questions. I'm going to bring in Angela Peoples. See if she's available now. And hold on. Okay, I've got Angela Peoples. Go ahead, Angela.
Lewis.
Go ahead, Angela. Yep.
No, it's me. It's Eileen, right?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Eileen.
No, right. So I wanted to comment really on the role of women. I suppose post the referendum in 2018, where the South won, the victory over women's, right to choose what they do with their own body, and I suppose and also the fact that in COVID we have seen how the majority of people who work in care or who are providing the front line are women, and those women are going out there doing the job, whether they're in care homes, whether they're nursing, whether they're in Sainsbury's or Tesco's working. It's bringing those women together in a socialist way, and I suppose tying it in with the fact that for a lot of working class women, whenever they seen the referendum and the rights of women won, in 2008, it was a great victory, and yet women in the north are still getting discriminated against, and the Tories they don't want to touch the whole thing of women and their reproductive rights, because they know that it's such a hot potato with the unionists, with the leader of the DUP, the likes of Arlene Foster. So it's about how do we unite women, getting into communities and discussing those issues that are really important to women over the next months ahead, and also how do you tie that in with maybe would you be campaigning for an all Ireland health service? Because I know that's the other thing, and from a point of view, I mean, I don't see myself as either any religion, but I know that I was born a Catholic, and what I would have always thought whenever it came to the national question is the health service was always the thing that would have stopped me and would have made me think about whether or not I wanted to become part of a united Ireland, because I really valued the health service. So whether we would get involved in maybe a campaign for a better health service, or what would our position be on that?
Thanks very much, Aileen. I guess we'll circle around again after a few more people, just because we haven't got much time left. There's a lot of people, so we'll hopefully circle around that when the other panelists want to talk. Next, we've got David. David, go ahead.
Hi, yeah. I've got like a couple of questions. I'm a member of Veterans for Peace, and I am a British Army veteran, and that, like, so just gonna put that caveat out there. I'm talking with comrades, and like we're looking at what's going on around the country at the moment and the high levels of division, and it's like the question basically is looking at the British state's modus operandi across Ireland over the centuries, which is intelligence gathering through infiltration, disrupting working class solidarity through subversion and coercion, as part of a continuous divide and rule strategy, which is basically where sectarianism evolved. Does anybody on this panel think that the current implementation of postmodernist ideology, identity-based politics is a rebranded form of sectarianism? And as I say, like, you know, I think that the spray painting of the cenotaph and the reaction to it, I mean, it just seems very, very orchestrated. And another thing is that the new Labour government used internationalism as a premises for humanitarian interventionist war, which turned out to be a form of corporate imperialist warfare, which was just dressed up in the language of liberal paternalism. Isn't there an argument against the promotion of internationalism whilst the world operates under this current free market capitalist system, basically? Yeah, that's about it, really, guys. So I'm really interested to see what anyone's got to say on that.
Thanks very much, David. Okay, next we've got Marie. Hold on.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, hello. Hello, this is a wonderful discussion. Thank you for letting me speak. I am no expert in the matter. It strikes me then, nevertheless, that the question of Ireland is linked in many ways to other situations, like, for example, in Kashmir or in Palestine, in the sense that there is no solution locally. There is only now, because of the way capitalism has put divisions and partitions between everything, there is only one way to tackle it now. It is from the point of view of federations and putting forwards, like many of us have said just already. And I think that it is nevertheless quite a commentary on the situation we are in when our rulers present themselves as great democrats who are bringing civilization to other countries. And you just look at what they've done to Ireland over generations, and the mind boggles. And I think that the question of the troops, it is for them quite a stupid thing to do to maintain troops up there, because now they are needing them for the war, which they are obviously preparing against Russia and China. They've got huge deployment of troops at the moment, which have gone on for months, which have gone from the United States throughout Europe towards Russia and towards China, through the Pacific and the Atlantic. And they still have got troops there in Ireland, which is not making sense. And I think that we are dealing with a situation where capitalism doesn't know where it is going. It is clueless. It's acting like it has done in front of the virus. It just goes on from one day to the other, responding to its interests and not knowing where it is going and what it's about. I would like to say then that for the comrades of Ireland, I give them all my love. I know it must be very, very galling, all this. I would say nevertheless that the answer, one answer, because there is no answer, one of the answers I would see is to put forward very simple things like conferences of trade unions, conferences of working class people and political parties, common to the north and the south, common to the north, the south and the UK and with Scotland, and to try to unify the pieces of the British Isles on a working class basis. Nobody can stop us having conferences. So let's try that and see. And somebody mentioned the trade unions, and this is very vital. There is trade unions in all these places. Many of them are the same. In Scotland, and even in Ireland, they're the same unions, some of them, as they are here. And so now we have to start thinking outside the box. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. I'm going to bring Anna in to speak because she's kind of had a few people talking about women's rights and things. So let me just unmute. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so basically, firstly, on the issue of women's rights, clearly the success in the south of Ireland in 2018 in achieving rights for women to have abortions to a limited extent, it has to be said, but to a far greater extent than was previously possible, was a very unique and like a happy time to have won that battle. And what it shows, I think, as well as the changing attitudes in the south of Ireland, perhaps because of changing, perhaps more interaction with the rest of the world, or, or recognition of the fact that women were going for abortions no matter what impediments were put in their place, that women were going to have to do it. But it also shows how the Irish state, and particularly the religious, clerical part of the Irish state, when I say part, I mean that they obviously have been historically an extremely important component, I would say, as I said before, a theocratic state, how far they've fallen in the eyes of people. Because it's funny when I hear people, comers in the north, say I'm neither Protestant or Catholic. I would say, very, very significant, large majority of people in the south now, probably, like, they would describe themselves as Catholics in a cultural sense. They would have, we still have communions and confirmations, but they're more like rites of passage. People have become a lot more secular in the south of Ireland, and that is a very positive thing. And clearly, I mean, the situation with women's rights is far from resolved, but we are in a stronger position than women in the north. Unfortunately for women in the north, I think the situation is very sharply posed there. And I absolutely agree that we should have a united movement on that question. There have been a number of initiatives on the women's question throughout Ireland, and to go to the north, the south, and other left-wing people to go to the north and campaign in the north for rights for Northern Ireland women there. Then I think, as Aileen, the same speaker, spoke about the national health problem and the situation in the south of Ireland, and I've written about this question for the Weekly Worker paper. I mean, it is a disaster the way the health service works in the south of Ireland, and I absolutely agree we should have a national campaign for free health service, free at the point of need, and with all facilities available. So health should be a right; it shouldn't come after profit. So I absolutely agree, and I think in terms of winning unity, there are questions that we can fight for unity on, working class unity on. But I still think, and this is in the interest of fighting for unity, that you still have to deal with the national question. And I hear what Harry says is that it seems intractable. And I can see that Marie has also said something similar and compared it with the situation in Israel and Palestine. I think myself that it's not necessarily intractable, and it can't be. Obviously, the whole question of Britain and the international issues and the struggle for an international working class are necessary. But we also ourselves, we have to think about what kind of socialism do we want, and how do we raise questions in terms of national rights in the here and now that cut across the bourgeoisie, that present the working class as a future ruling class with its own ideas and its own agenda to democratically resolve questions. Because I'm not arguing for the separation of Protestant people in a particular enclave in the north of Ireland. I think that that's a bad idea. I want to overcome that sense of, I suppose, a sense of being pushed into that position. Similarly to Scotland, I'm not for a separate Scotland, but I think that there needs to be a voluntary unity of the working class. And I think that that is a question for the here and now. I think the national question is a question for the here and now, and not something that we need to be looking at resolving after socialism, because I think our attitude to that question now will determine what kind of socialism we achieve, really. Okay, thanks.
Thanks very much, Anne. Still got a few more questions, but yeah, I'll try again for Matthew. I want to hopefully hear his voice. Let's see here.
Can you hear me
Matthew?
now?
Yes, finally.
All right,
great.
okay, no, I just had a quick fiddle with this microphone. So, okay, yeah, in terms of what comrades have said, it's been really interesting, especially looking, here in Glasgow, obviously, very serious effect of Ireland. It runs through a lot in this city. So the question, I think I agree with some of what's been said. I think that, but I don't agree in terms of some of the things that have been said about Scotland. I think that there is a national question in Ireland. There clearly is. Ireland is an imperialised country. It's clearly, if you look at its relation to Britain, or if you look at its relation to the other, things like the Apple case, where Ireland clearly sees itself as being a, basically a doormat for major imperialist companies and countries, and will actually refuse to take money when told to do so. And you have the question really is the difference with Scotland. Of course, Scotland is not an oppressed country. Scotland is a part of one of the major imperialist countries of the world. I don't expect there's going to be a separation of Scotland from UK, because I don't think that, one, it will be an economic catastrophe, and two, I don't think the SNP is silly enough to do it at this point, because there's no real way whereby Scotland could economically prop itself up by separating itself from the rest of the UK. It would be something else. So those of us would have to go through it. But in terms of what happens here, what's actually happening now, of course, is it's always been pretty rancid in many ways, in terms of the sectarian division in this city in particular, and it's getting worse. It's actually got to the point now where you've got a section of the sort of younger orange youth, particularly around the sort of Rangers support and so on, have now decided that their mission in life is to attack not only the Republican demonstrations, but also attack the Black Lives Matter, the left, refugee demonstrations, etc., etc. So there is this move towards sort of a variety of fascism in that section, which is a very worrying development, obviously for us. I think that, for me, the key thing is to say, right, okay, how can you remove the British from the piece? As a socialist in Britain, the question is then to say, well, okay, how do we remove the British from Ireland, and campaign to do that as a means of actually opening the question up, because it's the British that are actually, if you like, locking this whole thing in its sort of state, in which, of course, it's sort of socially and politically getting worse and worse. And you have this sort of thing in terms of, the north of Ireland, where essentially they set up this little Stormont, which is essentially a communalist parliament. It's one of very, very few in the world. I think there's only Lebanon, which is similar, which the whole structure of the thing is related to, can you actually be split into one society or the other, or one community or the other, and all the power structures and all the corruption and everything else is rooted in that way. In order to, you talk about the separation of the communities getting worse, but it's actually the material reason for that, of course, is the whole structure of the politics is predicated on that. So of course it gets worse. So you have to actually try and split that and remove that factor, the control of the British state and the input of the British state. And of course, in the south, it's just as horrible. In many ways. Obviously, you've got the collapse after the financial crash and the collapse of the banks and the imposition of the Troika and the EU, essentially sucking everything out of Ireland, which they've been doing for the last for the last 10 years at least, and there's no end to it, you know. And the question is, how do we remove all that from the situation? That as far as I see it, you know, that really it's about you know, then how to get out of that. And both of those are going to get worse with the imposition of even greater austerity. I mean, you know, the sort of fake leftism of Sinn Féin can be seen by the fact they've actually agreed through Stormont with the British to impose even worse austerity. And this is before even the effect of COVID. I mean, the problem with the effect of COVID, of course, is it's going to reduce, you know, the economic basis for the working class massively over the next 6 months. It's going to be an absolute massacre in terms of jobs, of living standards, you know, the whole lot. It's just going to be a huge attack. It's going to run through at a great pace, and you know, things are going to get really very, very bad. I think, you know, for lots of people all over the place, and particularly in somewhere like Ireland, where you've obviously you're starting from a base in which things have already been squeezed, and you've already got crisis. The problem is, of course, then the political. I mean, the political forces in Ireland. Unfortunately, nobody's actually come out. You know, because the Socialists have tended to tail one thing or another, either Sinn Féin in the south or whatever. You know, and we haven't actually had anybody come out with produce anything that's actually you know, stated, well, we stand for the working class and we'll fight it to the end, rather than say, okay, we'll tail whoever, you know. And as you say, as the comrade points out, you know, the unions even in I mean, while we may complain about unions in Britain, I mean, unions in Ireland, of course, being integrated into the Fianna Fáil machine are much worse. And the question is, how do we break out of that? But I mean, I think that, you know, so I mean, as I say, my position would be, say, to get the whole basis of British power and influence out of Ireland as a first position.
Thanks very much, Matthew. Harry wants to come in on this, and then we'll talk to Alec and Mark afterwards. So go ahead, Harry.
Yeah, thanks, Lewis. Look, I want to very quickly deal with the opportunities that were both missed and also acted on from the trade union movement. I mean, you go back 100 years ago in the division of Ireland. I mean, Labour took a back seat on the matter. You know, in that period, Labour must wait. A crucial mistake at that period. Go on to the late 60s. The golden opportunity existed in the civil rights movement, predominantly Catholic movement, but had the support of the Protestant working class in some of the industrial workplaces and also among students. Likewise, an opportunity that the trade union and labour movement did not get involved in. If it had have done, it might have rewritten history. Going then ask yourself a very simple question. What brought an end to the violence? It was the movement from the trade unions in the early 90s that mobilised 20,000 people in the city of Belfast calling for an end to the violence. Now, the people that got the credit for it was the authors of the Good Friday Agreement. It wasn't them. It was the people organised predominantly within the trade union movement that brought that about. Today, I mean, the national question has dominated. I mean, the last 100 years since the division has been the national question, and right up to the present day. Why does it still dominate? Why does it still, in the part of British imperialism and also the acting political parties? The reason is very simple: to keep us divided. It's been the central issue that has kept the people of Ireland divided, and it happens in election after election after election. And that is why the answer to this whole movement, the trade union movement, is the biggest organised movement. It's not the only movement. We've seen recently with the BLM movement. There is movements outside the trade union movement that we need to link up to and unite the people, be it on the races of racism, or be it on the even social issues that Andy mentioned, and other issues around the whole thing. We need to link up to those movements. But certainly I think the biggest movement is the trade union and the labour movement. And not only do we need to be discussing this, we need to mobilize them and at a crucial periods in time to force the leaders to take action. We've had some success in the past, in the 90s, that was just mentioned, on the question of violence. And what we called for then, incidentally, that we were not just calling for the end of violence, but for the trade union movement then to take up the key issues that has caused the division of Ireland and the social and economic issues. And unfortunately, we weren't able to move the trade union leaders on that issue. But certainly on the issue of violence, it was the pressure from the working class and trade unions in particular that mobilized them under that. So there's opportunities that have existed, and there will be opportunities in the future. And that's what Lucia was saying there about the discussions. We need to force the trade unions to mobilize, the leaders to mobilize into action. And that's where there's, the opportunities will exist in the future. And that's one of the areas how we can progress this movement forward by intervening in those movements when they come up. Okay, Lewis?
Thanks very much, Harry. We're going to jump in then with Alec next. Is that okay, Alec? If you want to ask your question.
Okay, yeah. So there's a question primarily for Donal. Obviously, as the candidate of a campaign that successfully called for socialism, and it resonated across the sectarian divide. So, like, how did that happen? Because if that's what we want, we're going to need to replicate that. So I think it's incumbent on all of us to kind of study partly the campaign that you actually ran, but also all the sort of groundwork that was done, possibly decades beforehand, that led up to the electoral victory. And if we know a bit more about that, the sort of follow-up question really is: can such a victory be upscaled, or is it at the moment only able to be limited to one seat? And if it can be upscaled, how can we do that? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alec. I'll bring Mark in as well, because he's actually one of the last questions. So give him his day. So go ahead, Mark.
Good evening. It's more a few observations, really. Firstly, the recent general election did feature Ireland in a reactionary sense, in terms of the fact that Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell were both linked to the IRA, and it was an issue which did come up on the doorsteps when canvassing for the Labour Party. However, for most English working class people who show an interest in Ireland, is generally reactionary. You would never know, but the most obvious signs of sectarianism and racism which takes place in English football grounds is around Ireland, and is about the constant abuse of James McShane, who can be expected at every away game and even at home games to face a torrent of abuse because of his where he comes from, Derry, which started as him being unwilling to wear a poppy. And somebody earlier made reference to the Rangers fans. It's not just Rangers football fans, it's football fans who in many different amongst many different clubs, who identify strongly with loyalism with the UVF, and can be regularly heard on English football grounds chanting "No surrender to the IRA." That has been built up over 25 to 30 years and is one of the primary motivating forces of the far right's growth in this country. Many English working class lads in particular, who have people who have been in the military, identify very strongly with the suppression and putting down of the Irish. As somebody who regards himself as an English working class Republican, I believe that the problems of Ireland are largely caused by Britain's presence there. And therefore, I wish to campaign to remove Britain's presence from that country. Where I find it slightly contradictory there, therefore, to some extent, is to hear speakers basically saying from Ireland that shouldn't be the position, that unless there's going to be a socialist Ireland, then Britain should retain some of its presence, that it has a presence which in some way is progressive because it allows through the trade union movement the development of across communities, structures and fights. And I'm unconvinced of such a position which has been put forward. I'm not unwilling to basically change my views or my mind in terms of the situation, because obviously I recognise the right of people in the countries which have been oppressed by my own to come up with the conscious means and methods of struggle. But what I would say is such a position disarms working class socialists like myself, who, when people then basically identify with their own ruling class through the army, the biggest political events which take place in England are around the army. They have managed to mobilise, when in Halifax where I live, the biggest political left event that I've seen in this town in the 15 years might have been about 800 people to oppose the cuts. More people were having their jobs cut, yet they can get 10, 15,000 people on the streets on Remembrance Sunday. In itself, that's not a sectarian, or it's not a difficult to understand that. But even the return of troops, the biggest statue in the town is to the Duke of Wellington's regiment. These are issues which the working class identifies with in this country, and they do so for pretty reactionary reasons. In the end, he's certainly, I know Donald well, is certainly, and I'm a great admirer of his politics and stuff, and we had brief discussions on these issues. Now, I appreciate I've come in too late to raise those points, so I don't anticipate anybody to answer them. I'm just basically putting down some genuine fears of that political situation, and you know, the other sad fact of the life is that many other people, they don't really care about Ireland. They really just don't care. It's something they only cared basically when the cities and towns were being bombed by some sections of the Republican movement. I wish that wasn't the case. I wish people did take it and realise that many of the techniques that have been used by the police and the rest of the other people against the English working class, the Scottish and the rest, were refined overseas. And to just point that out is often problematic. I'm trying to answer my own question myself, so I'll shut up now. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Mark. That actually was a really great question. It's actually a pretty good one to kind of end the discussion on. So I guess to bring that round, Donal, do you want to come in first to discuss this? There's a lot in that question. I really like it, so go ahead.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and I would expect nothing more than that from Mark. He's a great union historian. He knows his stuff on the history of the TNG, and also at the intersection of progressive politics with football, which is interesting, and also maybe reactionary politics with football. And I think there's there is certainly truth in what he's saying, that, you know, there have been issues of labour aristocracy, not just in you know, Britain. It was well documented that, but it is a continued factor, and there is an identification among many working class people for reactionary perspectives right across the board, whether it's racism. Certainly anti-Irish stuff has been traditional in England, but I think it's now near enough more and Islamophobic. It'd be probably even a bigger problem. And the militarist nature of British imperialism, as one old friend of mine said, that one of the first victims of British imperialism was the English working class, and English culture was actually systematically undermined really by the development of imperialist culture, and there's a lot of huge issues there around that. I think you can nearly have a discussion all on their own. What I would say to Mark is that I remain, certainly as a socialist, absolutely fixated and committed to defeating imperialism. The question is really one of strategic, you know, how do you do that? It's very easy to fall into the trap of nationalism, and nationalism takes you nowhere when you've got a state which was created 100 years ago, relatively stable these days. Okay, there's Brexit and so on, with an inbuilt British majority in it. And the question you have to ask yourself is, you know, banging your head against that wall is not going to get you too much further. So the question has to be, and it's a great start off, is how we unite working class people around what they are in common, and then develop that and develop a wider political program. And quite naturally, it will come across both and come up against the limits set by the bourgeois state in the South, but it will equally come up against the limits set by imperialist influence, the lack of democracy. For heaven's sakes, you look at Stormont, you don't even have to make a criticism of it, but it still operates within the narrow confines set by a neoliberal British state. There is obviously continued involvement, anti-democratic involvement by organs of the British state in Northern Ireland. And how best do you take that on? Well, I don't think there is any way of taking it on, frankly, unless we commence from the solid basis of uniting working class people. So, and I think it's very important and worthwhile that we have people like Mark there in England who are standing against chauvinism in all its manifestations, who are standing against imperialism in the country, in the belly of the beast, I think, as Castro said it about the United States. And it is important, but I think you also need to reflect upon the difficulties involved in the concrete situation we have on the ground here, where there's almost 1 million people who are concentrated in one part of our Ireland, if you want to call it that, who feel no part or parcel of that, and for whom a forced reunification process would actually only lead them to be completely isolated, potentially disadvantaged, you know, discriminated against. All those fears, the very real fears. There may be a degree of whether or not they're actually accurate or not, but I think they're very real, and we have to take them on the basis of their objective and subjective importance. And I think it is possible to answer. Now move on to the second point, which is the previous one about how someone like me, with my perspective, committed socialist or revolutionary socialist, can get elected with no Labour Party or anything like that around me. It shows the possibility of actually uniting people across the sectarian divide, based on principled politics, based on fighting politics, based on trade union activity, years and years as a trade unionist, years of campaigning against every single cut. I wish Labour Party politicians would campaign against the cuts the same way. Every single cut has to be opposed, against neoliberalism, against sectarianism, against pollution. For example, the fracking industry. We led a massive campaign here, a really powerful campaign to defeat fracking. Certainly taken an advanced position against the oppression of women, against the oppression of LGBT, against the oppression of people on the basis of the color of the skin, disability, religion, of course. But it's consistent work. It's organization. It's not being sectarian to other forces. It's trying to reach out and build broad coalitions. And I think if this can happen in Enniskillen, 100 miles or 88 miles from Belfast, small town, regional, rural, relatively industrial base, but it's not that much of an industrial town. It's not like Dungannon or somewhere. Can this happen elsewhere? Yes, it can. This could happen right across the north. We could transform the society with a consistent socialist program, just the same, actually, I think, as Jeremy Corbyn's Labour movement, if it had adopted a firm socialist approach, I think it would have broke through the trammels. Realistically, the position on Brexit, I think, cost the election. And other things like the cuts that have been implemented by Labour politicians. If you have a consistent, principled socialist programme, I think you will win working class people. And most importantly, you'll win working class people away from supporting fascism, sectarianism, racism, all these negative factors. If you offer a pure socialist politics, it can transcend the divisions. It can unite working class people. And it has to be internationalist, because Mark, your brother in the struggle, and we're all here in the struggle, but we've got to try and advance socialism together. And I don't think there can be a solution to an Irish problem without having an arrangement that reflects the identity of that nearly 1 million people in our country who rightfully assert their British identity. We need to reflect that. That's a reality. It's not something going to go away, and it's not something I want to go away. I want to respect people from that perspective and to involve them and engage them and build, and they have a rightful place in building a new society, a new socialist society. That's I think where I'm coming from.
Thanks very much, Donal. Anne and Harry, if Anne wants to come in first, but just to promote a question, sorry, that David had earlier. He just wanted me to ask again, is there an issue where the promotion of internationalism, whilst the world operates under this current free market, will it not have an effect where it brings about internationalism in the form of imperialist internationalism? That's what New Labour, they pushed internationalism with, by destabilizing Iraq as a way of promoting internationalism. So how do you avoid that with Ireland? How do you push internationalism without it becoming a point where you're telling a country what to do? And I think that kind of boils down to, if you're talking about the north of Ireland and the Good Friday Agreement, how do people in the rest of Britain show their internationalism without just saying, okay, here's the 6 counties, you can have them? Do you know what I mean? It's trying to balance those feelings where people feel that, okay, we're gonna right our wrongs, we're gonna show solidarity to Ireland, and we're just gonna flip over and give the 6 counties back. I guess that's the question: is how do you avoid that problem? Anne, if you want to come in at all.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So, firstly, in terms of internationalism, I believe that we need to have proletarian internationalism, and I think that does very clearly oppose liberal internationalism, because it says that the working class, as the international majority of the world's population, have nothing to lose but their chains, to put it the manner that Marx and Engels so famously did in the Communist Manifesto. We want another world. We oppose the kind of policies of liberalism, and we have our own agenda. And that agenda has to include demands on all sorts of questions to do with the peoples of the world. It can't be simply about economic questions. It's got to be about political questions. And in terms of Britain, in terms of the British Revolution, I think it is very simply still the case that Ireland, the question of Ireland, lies at the heart of the British Revolution in many respects today. The continuing question of British imperialism's occupation of Northern Ireland has yet to be resolved by the British working class or by the Irish working class. We now have a situation where the Good Friday Agreement, which was negotiated between the British government, obviously the Republican movement, which had decided, we can talk about why, but I think the demise of the Soviet Union had something to do with why they wanted to negotiate a peace treaty. And the other party to that agreement was the United States. The United States, world hegemon of imperialism. There is no way that I think that Good Friday Agreement can be considered as anything but an imperialist solution which stymied national rights and kept frozen the the sectarian divisions in Northern Ireland and kept Southern Ireland as an economic colony of Britain. And that is clearly the case. I think Mark has made the points about that. When we hear here in the South about the latest decision of Boris Johnson in relation to Brexit or whatever, we all know what this means to us. We are under the cosh of British imperialism, despite the fact that we have our own state. The situation in Northern Ireland continues to oppress all the peoples of this island. And I suppose I do just want to say, in terms of republicanism, I have been arguing all the way through this that we need to fight for a united Ireland which does not repress the Protestant people of the north of Ireland. There is no way that we should be looking to reverse the poles of oppression. But it must be said that the Northern Ireland Republican movement came out of a real situation of repression, and it was a fight back against the repression that was being suffered by Catholics in Northern Ireland. Their rights, they had no rights to housing, they had no rights to many amenities, and they were continually repressed. So I find a difficulty sometimes when perhaps Donal is talking about the poison of republicanism. I'm not a Sinn Féiner. I have a lot of criticisms of the Republican armed struggle, but I think it was a legitimate struggle. So I think just finally, I agree that we need a universal struggle for socialism, and I agree that that it has to be democratic. But I think that, like today's debate, which has been, I think, a lively debate, is very important for us to have more of these kind of discussions and perhaps look at specific issues in relation to Ireland, like the trade union movement, like the Good Friday Agreement, like the policies of British imperialism, like Brexit, so that we can learn and educate each other. I've learned from listening to Donal and listening to Harry and listening to Aileen and other comrades in the north of Ireland today, as well as listening to people in Britain. And I think that this is a dialogue that we need to continue. So thank you very, very much for including me in this debate. Thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Anne. Harry, have you got any closing remarks and reactions for the last wee while? Because you know, there've been a lot of questions put forward and a lot of analysis.
Yeah, Lewis, I mean, it's great having this discussion. And I think for many people that haven't lived in the country here, they may well have learned a great deal. And you always learn something about this, whether you live in the country or not. And I mean, I hope that this expands now to the labour organisations, other organisations in Britain as well, and of course engage more people in the south of Ireland. So I hope this is the first of many, many discussions on this. On the case of internationalism, I mean, internationals, you play a huge role in international movements. I mean, if you looked at the apartheid South Africa, it was, I mean, for example, the Dunn Store strike was a very changing situation internationally that was opposed to apartheid in South Africa. And it was a massive strike, really. I mean, the political implications were huge. You take what's going on in Israel and what the annexation of states and the absolute brutality that's taking place against Palestinians. I mean, there's a huge movement internationally in condemnation about what's going on in that country. So international movements do play, you know, a major movement, whether we're involved in them and for them being involved in any campaigns and on the national question here in Ireland. I think for us is that, you know, we do have to give, it's a complex issue here. And it's, you know, we don't have a formula that we can necessarily put on. I mean, there's been a lot of brutality that has taken place in here, predominantly in the 70s, in the Bloody Sundays and so on. That brutality invited a great deal of international condemnation that did change the situation. As for a solution, it's a bit more complex. because I think all the points that have been raised by Donal and Anne and other people is that we need to develop this movement. We need to intervene in the movement. And it's around issues. There's certainly a lot of issues we can unite on. And there's, they've been mentioned about the social issues and the health service and so on. There are more contentious issues. And this is where I think we have been holding back on. The likes of parades and flags and right to march and all those sort of things. And these are the issues that I think we've got to get stuck into. Just very quickly, there was an issue here that came up on flags in the local town where I lived, and I was contacted by media about what our stand was, and I had to speak on behalf of the Mid-Ulster Trade Union Council. And the position we took was we don't agree with any of these divisive flags in any town and city. And I think on reflection, it's issues like that there, I think that was the correct position, because they were deliberately there to divide people. And these are, it's taking that stand that I think we've got to get more involved in here, in uniting people around even these contentious issues. And I think that's something that we now need to concentrate on. So look, it's been a great discussion, and as I say, I want to thank particularly to Donal and Anne for their contributions in this. I hope this is the first of many, and let's try and engage more people in Britain and in the south of Ireland, and for that matter, with plenty of contacts in our various organisations, socialist movements. There's even the European Trade Union movement, which is a movement that's not really used enough, to be quite honest, in bringing trade unions right across Europe. But I think we should, that's where I think we're going to have to concentrate, get the message out, get more people engaged in this. But it's been a good discussion, so thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to thank everyone for great questions. This is a very rare opportunity to openly discuss this with people who have so many different opinions. Usually, growing up here, it's a case of it becomes very divided and sectarian very, very quickly, trying to discuss this, because a lot of the problems people face here, we talk about politics and we talk about economics here, and we talk about borders and geography, but a lot of the problems stem from emotions, and they stem from people's family and friends and their cultural backgrounds, which, you can change a border, you can change, the currency, you can change the flag, but people's cultural backgrounds are hard to change. And I think these discussions where people can talk about it and explain it, and it doesn't become a culture war, it doesn't become this who's better, which culture is right, which flag's right. It becomes more about these problems to fix. And I think as well, this conversation has been very much about the different trade union movements. But whenever you roll back a lot of the discussion, if you want to talk about austerity, if you want to talk about women's rights, equal marriage, everyone on this island is very much on the same page, and everyone on the left is very much on the same page. And that is one silver lining to it, which is whether or not there's United Ireland as it stands in the future and so on, the left here is very much on the same page on the key issues, and I think when it comes to the status quo parties of the SDLP and Sinn Féin up here, who obviously try and take the position of the nationalist side, and if you look at the DUP and the Ulster Unionists of the unionist side, you can see that they don't have any answers for austerity, women's rights, or equal marriage that isn't a contradiction of where they've always been. So these things are contradictions that are materialistic. These are things that people's everyday lives, the political establishment just don't represent. And I think that's where it all falls away in terms of unionists versus nationalists, because you can see that it doesn't matter if it's the establishment in the Republic or the establishment up here. They generally aren't on the side of what people want. Like, look at this new government being formed in the Republic. It's the establishment, left and right per se, forming a government. This is absurd. being supported by the Greens party. It's almost like a joke, where you have these people who are doing anything to preserve their power and stop working class politics being talked about, being repressed at every opportunity. And, you know, and the same can be said in Stormont. They will use their flags to suppress, you know, austerity. It talks about austerity. If you look at this COVID crisis, again, there's been some unity, but look what happened last week with Michelle O'Neill and the situation with the funeral. Instantly, it's a fire topic. It's been thrown around. It's been manipulated by sectarianism straight away. And I think the only way to get around this, any of these discussions, is to scale it back. You know, have people who are British, have people who are British Irish, have people who are Irish, have people who are Northern Irish. You got all these different, you know, cultural signifiers, and just say, you know, we can have a very simple conversation and say, you know, we have these big issues to deal with in society that are affecting people's lives right now. You know, we can work together. We can make change as long as we see each other as equals, and we see that no matter what happens, if it's any United or not, we have to work together and we have to stick together, because we're not going to have, you know, the establishment's never going to help us. So, you know, this conversation's been a great one, and I really would, like Harry said and Donal said and Anne said, we'll have to have these conversations again, and I'm sure we will, and maybe sooner than we think we'll have, you know, everyone on again and being able to discuss how we can move this forward and work together across borders, because, you know, we obviously all are on the same side. So I don't know if any of the other speakers have anything else they want to say or finish, or if they're happy enough, we can call it for now. Yeah, no problem. Thanks everyone again. This here webinar will be up on the Labour Left Alliance website, and you can view it there. And if you have any questions or you want to get involved in any more educational webinars, go to Labour Left Alliance website, and we'll see you all soon. Thanks very much. Take care. Bye-bye.